This is Join Us in France, episode 46. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elise is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller. Mm-hmm. On today's show, we take you to the Dordogne for the first time, I believe, in our mini podcast, 46 podcasts. Dordogne is a lovely area, just a little north of Toulouse where we live, and there's lots and lots to see. But today specifically, as we announced last week, we are going to take you to Sarlat. Beautiful, beautiful place, lots to see and do and eat. And it's going to be a fun one. So before we get going, let's have a little music, and then we'll come back and talk about Sarlat. Okay, we're back. Shall we talk about Sarlat?
Yes, let's talk about Sarlat.
Okay.
Sarlat is, as we mentioned very briefly in the last podcast,
right.
It's in the center of a department. And of course, everybody remembers that there are so many departments that are like big counties in France called the Dordogne. And the Dordogne is in fact the name of the river, which is a very important river that runs through the department and empties out into the waters where the Garonne meets up at Bordeaux into the Gironde.
Okay. And so that's also two podcasts ago.
That's two podcasts ago. And this is actually north by northwest of Toulouse. So by car from Toulouse, it's just about 2.25 hours away.
Yes.
Because part of it is by big auto route and part of it is these lovely little narrow country roads, departmental roads. And it's just about, I would say, an hour and a half from Bordeaux. So it's really almost halfway in between the two.
And then when we talked about Saint-Cirque-la-Popie a few episodes ago, it's like an hour north of Saint-Cirque-la-Popie.
It's actually west.
West, okay. Maybe it is.
It's west.
I didn't look at the map.
Yeah, if you look at the map and you get off at more or less Cahors to go east, to go to Saint-Cirque-la-Popie, you go a little bit further north and then west.
Okay.
So it's kind of up in that direction.
Okay.
The difference, in fact, it's the two departments. The lot is butts up against the Dordogne department.
Yes.
And so Saint-Cirque-la-Popie is going east into the Lot department, and Sarlat is pretty much going northwest into the Dordogne department.
Right. And what's exceptional about the Dordogne is that it's like an English colony out there.
Yes,
there are so many English people who live there and have lived there for many, many years.
Yes, and that's part, of course, of what its history is in that whole region. Which we'll talk about in a little minute. I just want again to situate it.
Yeah.
I had mentioned last time. I take back something I said. There is a teeny little local choo-choo train that does go from Bordeaux to Sarlat, which I thought had been discontinued, but apparently it still exists.
Now, when you say choo-choo train and teeny, it's not like a train on wheel. I mean, it's an actual train.
It's a train,
okay.
But it's one of these. Now they have these things that are made by Bombardier, which are one big car, and they're used for countryside local train travel, and they're very interesting because it's just one big car with a motor engine at both ends.
And they just turn around.
They don't even have to move around on the tracks. They just go from one place to another, and they go back and forth.
Yes, I see them around Toulouse as well.
Right,
and they're usually like regional lines.
That's what it's called, a regional line. Now, according to what I was just reading,
but they're very fast. They're not choo-choo trains.
Well, they're not fast, and
it's not a TGV. It's not a bullet train.
But these are the ones that could do every little bumpity bump town along the way.
Okay.
That's what I mean when I say it's not very fast.
It stops.
It stops
places.
a lot.
Yeah.
Now, I'm taking it for a given that this information is accurate, because I have to say that my first visit to Sarlat, which was a very long time ago, there was indeed a very active train station there. And then I knew that for a number of years there was no longer one. So this is what the last information was that I picked up, and I'm assuming that it is accurate. There's also another town that's on the western edge of the Lot area that's on the main road going north-south called Souillac, which we will probably talk about one day.
Yes.
And from there are a couple of times a day buses that will take you to Sarlat.
I see.
So basically what I'm saying is that if you don't have a car, which helps you get to Sarlat from either Bordeaux or Toulouse, or eventually if you're coming down very far from Paris, then these are the only two options you would have to get there. And it's really in the middle of nowhere. In the sense that the region around it,
it's very central in France.
It's very rural. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's very developed with a lot of old, gorgeous, historical little villages. But there are no other major cities of any kind nearby.
Yeah, it's not it's not an industrial area. It doesn't have a lot of development that way. It does have a lot of tourism.
It has a lot of tourism.
Yes,
and the tourism, of course, in the area, as you mentioned, is partly. It's interestingly because it's partly because of the fact that there are a lot of English people there, but it's also because historically, and this is something we mentioned briefly when we did our podcast about Bordeaux, this is in an area that in historical terms is called the region of Périgord Noir.
Right.
And the Périgord, Perigord,
yes,
Périgord, is the ancient Occitan name for this area, and it's called the Périgord Noir, which means black, because the area is filled, and traditionally was filled, with forests of live oak. And live oak are oak trees that never lose their leaves.
Right.
And it had this very, very dense forest. And so the old name given to this region in the Middle Ages was based on this fact that it was very dense and dark green. And so they called it the Périgord Noir, which is interesting because, as an aside, to the east of Toulouse is a region called the Montagne Noire.
Right.
And it's called the Montagne Noire for the very same reason.
I see.
Because the forests were so dense and dark.
I see.
That from a distance, it really looks black, And one of the things and this is, of course, part of the history as a culinary history of Sarlat.
Yes.
But it's connected to the fact that it's the Périgord Noir, is that one of the things that you find where there are live oak trees are truffles. And so there's another reason to call it the Périgord Noir, because these are black truffles. Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
Because there are places
in
Italy where it's white truffles.
Exactly. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and we don't have white truffles here. We have only the black ones.
Yes.
So, and that is really one of the things that is found in the Dordogne region. There are some other parts of France as well, but because, in fact, this is something that develops underground where there are a lot of live oak trees.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. So Sarlat. Sarlat is famous, and it really is, especially here in France, and for people who are interested in the history of architecture and the history of art, it's famous because its entire city center is a major historical monument that is all entirely Renaissance, early Renaissance, and late Renaissance buildings, and it is absolutely beautiful. There's a part of Sarlat, of course, that is outside the old historical center, but the town itself is not that big. The town itself is just about 10,000 people as permanent residents, because, of course, it's a place that has a lot of tourism and a lot of people coming through.
Probably bulges a lot in the summer.
It bulges a lot. It bulges. And not only does it bulge a lot in the summer, but it bulges a lot on Saturdays, because one of the things that's very famous in Sarlat is its Saturday market. Now, last time we talked about Christmas markets, and I mentioned that Sarlat is famous in this region as having a very interesting and very lovely Christmas market.
Right.
But it's true that Sarlat is famous through history for its markets.
Okay.
It's one of the reasons it became a rich town. So before we to that, I just want to mention a few things about its history because, as you mentioned, the Dordogne is a very beautiful area. It's really lovely green rolling hills and a few rivers that run into the Dordogne River, which is a very big river.
Yeah.
And it's not a wine growing area as such, but it's a region that is filled with limestone caves. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? That means that because of its geographic qualities or characteristics, it was a place that people had gone to live starting in prehistoric times. Mm-hmm. And because this is in the southwest of France, which was a part of the continent that was relatively mild during the last glacial periods, this was an area, and it is an area that has among the most important finds in prehistoric art.
Right. Cro-Magnon is there.
Cro-Magnon is there, and not just Cro-Magnon, is there. Mm-hmm. Because the people who did the prehistoric art, and I'll mention a few of the places that are near Sarlat that you can actually go and visit from there. These were, of course, like people like us. These were Homo sapiens sapiens. And so because this is a region that's filled with overhangings that are natural overhangings and all of these limestone caves, what has happened is that this is one of the parts of France where archaeology connected to the prehistory began. Mm-hmm, and it began actually at the end of the 19th century and the very beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it is still one of the areas that people go to, and they stay either in Sarlat or one of the other towns nearby to go and visit some of these caves that are still open to the public.
Yeah.
To see some of the... some people would call it artwork. Some people would just say drawings and marks and imprints. Mm-hmm. There's a whole lot of...
what do you call it?
I call it art.
Yeah.
I call it art.
It's very beautiful.
But there's also, besides the art, there are footprints, handprints, marks that are obviously marks meant to be the equivalent of signs, like a signature, in the sense that it may have been a particular group, a particular tribe, a particular something or other, a source of identification. But next to that, you find images that I think you can only call art.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
They're beautiful. And if you think that art in general through history for everywhere in the world was, until the recent past, connected to some kind of religious belief and activity, it makes perfect sense that this was probably for the same reason, for some kinds of ceremonial things.
It's a good guess anyway. Yeah.
But anyway, so this is one of the things that
I got to tell you a story. Yeah. Why? Because I heard somebody say, why is it called Cro-Magnon? And it's because the cave where they found this belonged to a man called Monsieur Magnon. Yeah. And Cro meant belonging to.
Oh, it's
an old Occitan thing.
Oh, how interesting.
And so they named the village, they must have renamed the village, because there's an actual village called Cro-Magnon.
That's right.
And it's because of that, because it belonged to this Mr. Magnon.
Oh, then, that's very interesting, because I didn't know that, but what I did know was that the finds that they've had that are connected to anything from what we call prehistory are named after the place that they were found. So, for instance, there is a period called the Aurignac period. And it's because the town was Aurignac.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense. If you go to Sarlat to visit Sarlat, it is gorgeous. The old part of the city center is unique in that it is 100% and beautifully kept up, magnificently kept up. Uh-huh. Houses from the 1400s, 1500s, and 1600s. Now, it's not quite the same as Saint-Cyclope, which we talked about a few podcasts ago.
Yeah.
It's a little bit later. It's late Renaissance. It's gorgeous. And it's all made out of this beautiful, creamy, pale yellow limestone.
Yes.
With very steep roofs. And there are a few pictures that we'll have so you can see.
Yeah, on the website, yeah.
I had just put up last night the most famous of these houses called Maison de la Boété, which is the building that now holds the tourist office and belonged to a very important poet and man at the beginning of the 1500s, and the house is still named in his honor.
Yeah.
And all around it, what you have are these magnificent streets, and it's a little hilly, so it's very charming because it makes it a little bit more interesting than if it was just all flat.
Yeah.
Because this is the hills of the Dordogne area.
Yeah, the Dordogne, the whole area is quite hilly. Yeah.
It's not mountainous, but it's hilly.
Yeah.
So you have this absolutely gorgeous city center, all cobblestone streets, and this magnificent Renaissance architecture. And one house after the other is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's just magnificent. And because it's a region that has been for centuries and centuries wealthy, because it was a center of merchandise and of markets, even going back into the early Middle Ages, all of these buildings have been kept up in a wonderful way all this time, and they never went through a period where things were totally run down. The only things that I know had to have been rebuilt were parts of the cathedral, because it was very, very old, starting in the 1200s, and the part of it had to be rebuilt. But it was rebuilt just a couple of hundred years later. So you can see the difference between the earliest part of the architecture and the part that came a little bit later. But the rest of the town, it looks... One of the things that's magical about it is that it looks like it was just made yesterday, and yet it's from the 1500s, pretty much. I mean, you have a couple of things from the late end of the 1400s, and then obviously there are some buildings from the 1600s, but it's like kind of walking into a magical wonderland, and it's gorgeous everywhere.
Yeah, and it's different than other villages in the area, like you said earlier, because it's Renaissance and not Middle Ages.
Not Middle Ages, right.
Right. And so it's a very different style. It's more like the style of houses you will see a lot in Paris, actually.
No, a little bit in the Latin Quarter. A little bit in the Latin Quarter. Paris is unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, a little bit later. Paris is more like what you'd see in Bordeaux. Most of Paris now is more like what you see in Bordeaux, which is really the next big architectural period afterwards, which comes to more like the classical style.
Okay, so this is early Renaissance.
This is a little bit earlier. So you still have a teeny little bit of half timbering, but what you have is those beautiful Renaissance windows with the tiny little pieces of pane that for some reason I associate, I don't know why, with Shakespeare. Don't ask me why. It has nothing to do with Sarlat at all. But these... windows that have beautiful stone casing around them, cut into 4 or 6 with these tiny little pieces of glass.
Yeah.
I mean, because the historical center is a registered area, it's protected. So nobody can change any of this, and they've kept it up very well. So you can go into some of these, most of this is still, of course, private houses with shops down below, because this was a merchant's town. But you have some courtyards you can go in, and you can see these beautiful old wooden Renaissance staircases that spiral up or that have landings, because in the Renaissance they invented the staircase that has a flat landing instead of just being on a spiral, on a poke, that goes all the way up.
Yeah.
And there's you can sense the pride of the people in Sarlat, and maybe that makes them a little bit snobbish, maybe. But there's this real genuine pride in the appearance of their town and in taking care of it. And then of course it has a part that's more modern, which of course you don't really see a separation. You kind of go from one street to the other. There's one main straight street called Rue de la République, and basically it cuts the town almost completely in two.
Okay.
Most of the town on one side is the old historical part, and on the other side is newer. But there's a little bit of the old historical part that kind of flows over. And it's such a beautiful town, and it has so many of these nice little windy streets that you can spend a half a day just doing that. And wandering in and out of courtyards and tiny little alleyways. And it's just really, really gorgeous.
Yeah. So does it have like a massive church or...
It has a cathedral.
Okay.
It has a beautiful cathedral.
Because I remember going, but it was years ago. I don't really remember very much about it.
Well, this is one of those places where the civil architecture, which is basically the term used to describe it, seems to be what people remember more than the church.
I see.
The church is very interesting from the outside. It's less interesting or less memorable in my mind from the inside.
Yeah.
And one of the things about it's a cathedral. I mean, it was a cathedral. I don't know if it functions actually as a cathedral anymore because the town doesn't really need a cathedral anymore. It's
because
it's too
technically a
small
cathedral is a place
for
where
with
there's a bishop.
Right, exactly.
So maybe there isn't a bishop there
I don't
anymore.
think there's a bishop there anymore. But one of the things about the church is that it is exactly like in the Middle Ages because there's no big esplanade. There's no separation.
I see.
There's no the houses butt up right against it. So there's a spot where you can walk up this hill and you go to this famous little structure called the Lantern Tower, which is very unusual because it looks how do I explain it? Nobody really knows what inspired the shape of the architecture. It's kind of an elliptical losange. I don't even know how to describe it.
I'll have to go look for a picture.
You have to go look for a picture of it. There's a
Yeah.
picture on, I'm sure, on Wikipedia. It's not very big, but they believe that it was built to be a tower so that it has 4 little openings on each side, and it's from about the 1100s. And they think that it was to put in lights as a signal about different activities or things that were happening in the town. And where it is, it's up on a hill right across from the top part of the cathedral. That is, there's this wonderful path you can take that walks you up to it. And you can look at this lantern tower on one side. It's not that big. And you can see the rooftop and the different stages of the building of the cathedral. But what makes it even more fascinating is that you realize that all of the houses are built right up against the cathedral. So it's genuinely the way it was in the Middle Ages.
Right.
It doesn't have, like what they did in Paris where they cleared out the houses to make space in front of the big church.
So no big esplanade in front of the cathedral.
Absolutely nothing.
Okay.
There's the main little cobblestone street. That's just the street that you go through the main part of town.
Yep.
And it's a normal medieval street, which means it's no wider than any other part. In fact, there's the only part that's actually a little bit bigger is a little further up where the main part of the typical Saturday market is held. And that was actually next to a building that belonged to the lords of Sarlat until the end of the Middle Ages. And what they did was they opened it up a little bit. There are a couple of more recent but not brand new buildings that have little hotels and cafes that are right there. So they're probably from the 1700s. That's probably the most recent thing you'll find in that part. But it gives you this sense that you are bustling through. I love to go there on a Saturday. Now, the problem, of course, with the Saturday is that if you don't get there by 9 o'clock, you will have to park your car about a mile away.
Oh, a mile isn't a big deal.
It's not a big deal. It depends on how many kilos of food and stuff you buy to take back to your car.
That's where those handy-dandy little rolly things are.
And then roll them across the cobblestones through the town.
Okay. Right.
No, really, I've been there, I don't know. I mean, I think I've been there about 10 times. Saturday market, people come from all over the Dordogne, all over, because the market in Sarlat is famous. And this is one of those where it's a food market, okay?
Yeah.
It's not a market for clothing and stuff like that, which is another day of the week. Sarlat is in the middle of an area that is famous for several different things. One of them is the truffles.
Yep.
Another is foie gras.
Yep.
As you mentioned, it's not a good idea to be a duck in this area.
Yeah.
Really, it isn't,
Bad for your health.
They also are in the middle of a walnut growing area.
Exactly. Yeah.
The walnuts of Périgord are wonderful.
And the walnut oil is fantastic.
And it's absolutely delicious and very good for you. Everything
I don't know
with
if
walnuts.
you ever tried to make scrambled eggs with walnut oil.
Oh, see, I've never done that.
Ooh, it is so good. It gives it a little bit extra. That's just right.
What I like is to make a salad and put a teeny little bit of blue or Roquefort cheese in and use a dressing with walnut oil. And it is absolutely delicious.
I have never tried that.
Oh, it's wonderful.
I might have to try that.
So everything with walnuts, and I happen to love walnuts.
And walnut cakes.
Walnut cakes and walnut oil and walnut vinegar. And to make things even better for somebody like me, it's in the heart of strawberry growing country.
Ah, yes.
So you have 2 seasons for strawberries in the region of Sarlat, which is very unusual. And it's unique to this region. You have the springtime strawberries.
And then the fall.
And then in September. And they have different varieties of strawberries. And this, of course, is very unusual because, first of all, France is a country that has now about 7 or 8 different varieties of strawberries. This is not the ones we import from other countries. This is French-grown and strawberries. But they have different varieties. In the States, I'm sorry, but in the States you have strawberries.
Yeah, the strawberries are
it's these big clunky things that come from Mexico. Maybe
California.
Maybe from California. But this France, we have different varieties, just like we have different varieties of apples and different varieties of pears. And Sarlat in September, when the strawberry second season comes out, and then you already have the walnut harvest. And then you have a little bit of foie gras. Now I'm really going to get myself hungry. And then you have also a lot of wonderful goat cheeses from this area, you see. So people come, aside from the fact that they also have a huge part of their market that's an organic food market, which means wonderful breads and wonderful honeys. It is literally a place that is jam-packed with people for their Saturday market.
Yep.
Now,
so what's your favorite strawberry? When you go to the store,
that's a hard one to answer.
Season.
I think Marais des Bois.
Marais des Bois.
Yeah, I think Marais des Bois.
I like Gariguette myself.
The Gariguette I like, but I like the. I think I like the Marais. Nobody has any idea what we're talking about. We're going to have to show them pictures.
They're just varieties of strawberries.
They're varieties of strawberries that have different sizes, different shapes, and actually different
flavors.
Tastes. Yeah. And different tastes. Yeah. And there's a new one that they make now called. I think it's called the Floribund or something like that. That is a cross between 2 others, and I'm not even sure which ones it is. But you know how every year they seem to come up with a new apple variety?
Yeah.
Well, in this area, they come up with a new strawberry. So I would move there just for the strawberries,
Yeah, and it's really fun because a lot of these strawberries are not perennial.
No.
So you have to replant them every year.
That's right. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of care and a lot of work. But they do give 2 harvests.
Yes, they really do.
A lot of them do. Not all of them. If they don't get too hot. If it's not too hot of summer. Strawberries are a little picky.
They're picky, right.
Yeah. But it's beautiful and they're lovely.
And they're lovely.
And you have to eat them fresh.
And
you
have
can't
to eat
ship
them fresh. No.
I mean, it's just...
You can buy honey and you can buy things like that you can ship and bring back. But you cannot, obviously... Walnut oil.
Those make wonderful gifts. Right. Every time I go back to the U.S., I take some walnut oil because people love that as a gift.
They love it. Yeah. Now, the food market is so famous that literally people come from 100 and more kilometers away just to go there on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Now, it fills up the entire old city space. That is all the little streets. And now, one of the nice things...
So it's not just under... I mean, they probably have a Place du Marché with
there's
a
Place du Marché. No,
there's no covering. Okay.
Well, this is the way it works. The street I mentioned called Avenue de la République is the street where you have the everything but food market.
Okay.
So you have crafts, you have soaps, you have toys, you have tablecloth, textiles, you have all the non-food things. And it's a long stretch. It's about a mile long.
Okay.
And, of course, it happens to be a street that has other shops and cafes. So it's a place where you can go if you need to get away from the food part. You can go wander there. You can also just sit in one of the places and have a coffee, which, of course, is a tradition. You go to the market and everybody stops and has a coffee somewhere and things like that. But if you go... behind Avenue de la République, you have a section that's a parking area that's under a bunch of plane trees. And there, it's half and half. You have local little producers that set up some fruits and vegetables, and then you have some textiles.
I see.
And then when you go into the old city, all of the main little streets that are all cobblestoned, every single one of them is filled up with the food market.
Wow.
Now, if you go off into the buildings where there are courtyards, no, there isn't the market there, but that's where all the cafes and restaurants are. And it's a great place to go for lunch or dinner because there's zillions of wonderful restaurants there.
And the market probably is just Saturday morning, right?
It's Saturday until 1 for the food.
Okay.
And the non-food, if I remember correctly, is all day long.
Okay.
So you can actually hang out there. And of course, the other thing besides truffles is that they have a lot of cep, a lot of the other kinds of wild mushrooms that.
Cep is like a portobello, but it's more flavorful. I don't know. Portobello mushroom isn't that flavorful.
I don't know. I've never figured out what to call a cep in English. But it's a wild mushroom.
Right. It's the size of a portobello, but it's not even and round. And
no, and you cook it. It's
like a gnarly looking, big, expensive mushroom.
That has to be cooked fairly quickly.
Yes. It doesn't keep very long. No. It makes for wonderful, like...
With omelets.
Omelets are nice.
And that's one of the things that's really fun to have there as a lunch is you can get an omelet with ceps, and a green salad as a sort of standard, like, simple lunch there.
Yeah.
Or you can get more elaborate and do the duck and the foie gras and the truffles and all that kind of stuff, because the region is filled with all of this stuff.
These products.
It's just, to die for.
They're local. So.
Right. Now, it's not in the center of a wine growing area, but there are wines not that far away at Bergerac and then, of course, the Bordeaux. And then there are some wines that come from the Cahors. So you're really close enough that they can bring in wines that are from not too far away that go with all of these foods. So basically, you have two wonderful reasons to visit the city or big town, if you want, of Sarlat, and that is for its gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous architecture and for this fabulous market. Now, there's a small little version of the food market that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is Wednesday mornings, but it's worth going on a Saturday. It's just really incredible, absolutely incredible. And then it has a lot of lovely little hotels. You also have, I think, some B&Bs there and things like that, because it's a great place to stop to visit the region. If you want to have 2 or 3 days, which is certainly worth it, to visit the region around it within just 50 or so kilometers in absolutely every direction, you have wonderful, wonderful things to see and discover. So it's a really to me, it's a place to spend at least 1 or 2 nights, you see, because you can really take advantage of the wonderful things that you have there, and then at the same time reach out in different directions.
So what would you go see nearby? Can you recommend places?
Yeah, there are a whole lot of places. There's if you go, not necessarily, there are a couple of different directions. The fact is that it's one of those regions where there is so much that's rich to see that it's almost impossible to sort of decide. But this is what I would do, and this is what I did the last time we went for a 3-day, 2-night weekend, if you want to call it there. Not necessarily. I'm not going to name the roads because I'm not even sure exactly which road goes where. But the other thing is that it's because it's in the center of this very largely touristy area, you have good signs, and the tourist office is excellent with giving out maps and indications of which roads to take to which, to get to which thing.
Right.
So,
but those tourist offices, they can tell you how to get there and whatever, but they cannot tell you where you should go next.
No.
They don't. They stay well away from that.
Yes, they do. So
they want you to decide where you want to go, and then they'll tell you how to get there.
They just give you, a lot of these things. So there are 2 things. One is to follow the Dordogne River. And doing this, you have enough to fill up, I would say, either a day or 2. Just alone. And a couple of some of the things that are my absolute favorite things to do is, now again, you have to figure out which roads that takes you out along the river itself. You are going through a region that is filled with magnificent little medieval towns, villages really, not towns, but villages. And also because it is a region that is part of historically the area fought over for centuries between the English and the French, it is a part of southwest of France that started to be re-invaded by the English after World War II, when things became affluent again, and a lot of the English were looking for second homes, and the first thing they thought of was Aquitaine. After all, Aquitaine used to belong to us, you see. So starting with the Bordeaux, they kind of moved out, and it is a fact that there are some little villages in the Dordogne area that are predominantly English speaking.
Yeah.
And it's kind of strange. It makes a weird feeling sometimes to walk into a store and you hear English as a first language spoken, not French, you know. But it's also true that the people who've moved in have restored life to a lot of these tiny villages and fixed up a lot of these old homes. And the regional architecture is absolutely gorgeous. It's very, very, very beautiful. So one way of doing this is follow the Dordogne and go to see...
so you go more west?
It's west, yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I don't have a map in front of me, and I may be mistaken, but I think it kind of... the Dordogne is a river that kind of does these... curlicue meander loops.
Yeah.
But basically you go west and slightly south. I'm not sure which road it is, but you get to two things. You get to a couple of absolutely gorgeous little villages that are along the river. And one of them is called La Roque-Gagnac.
Okay.
And it's very beautiful. It's not very big. It follows... it's linear. I don't know how to describe it in the sense that it's
like along the river.
It's along the river, and it just goes back up a little bit into a couple of hills, and you can walk through lots of restaurants, beautiful gardens. But one of the nicest things to do there is you can go out on one of the traditional flat-bottom boats. You can rent it. There are some boats where they're big enough where they actually have I don't know what you call them, a person who drives a boat, because it's not really driving a boat, but a rower. I don't know. Yeah, batelier, I guess you'd call it. They have the bigger version, which is the traditional one that was used as a boat for carrying things, for shipping goods.
So are these motorboats?
No.
Or are they're rowboats.
They're really... the oldest ones that are beautiful have a traditional, very interesting formed sail. And they are flat-bottomed with a keel, and maybe now they've added motors onto them. But traditionally, this is how they brought goods back and forth up and down the Dordogne. But you also have these little rowboats that you can rent, and it's on a nice day. It's a lovely thing to do.
Sure.
It's a section of the river around a bend that is not very dangerous. It doesn't run that fast. And so it's a very popular thing to do.
You don't have to have great canoeing skills.
No, you don't
anything.
have to have good canoeing skills. And it happens to be very close to another medieval town, which has a wonderful, unbelievable, fortified castle, and that is the town of Beynac.
Beynac, yes,
Beynac.
I've heard of that one.
And
I don't
Beynac,
think I've been to that one, actually.
you may have been. It's Beynac is Beynac,
Yeah.
and the castle is a castle that I've actually taken people through a number of times and actually had the chance to guide in, because several times the person that was the local guide was only a French-speaking person, and so I was able to be the co-guide and translate everything for that person.
Yeah.
And this is the original time period of this castle is the 1100s. It was added on to eventually for the next several hundred years. It's up on top of this huge rocky cliff overlooking the Dordogne River. The view is spectacular. And there's an Italian man, I don't remember his name, who bought the castle about 30 years ago and has been renovating it little by little. It's a historical monument. So he brings in the compagnons who've been working on this castle all these years. And you visit this castle, and it's one of the castles that's used for all the movies that are ever made about the Middle Ages.
I see.
It's great. It's gorgeous. The place, it's above the village. The village is a medieval village that's down below along the banks of the Dordogne River. And the village itself is absolutely gorgeous as well. We actually spent a night in one of the little hotels down below. But you drive up, it's about a mile drive up to the top to get into the entrance where there's a parking lot to go to this castle.
So you can actually drive to it.
Oh, you can drive to it. There's a big parking lot There are even buses that go up to the top.
Okay.
And the top has a little village as well with houses from the 1400s. And there are a couple of ice cream shops and restaurants there as well.
Yep.
But the castle itself is enormous. And when you go inside, you're in the grounds of the castle and you get this view overlooking the river and the cliffs and the castles. Remember I mentioned the other day that there were lots of castles because the English, when they built a castle, the French would build a castle as well.
Yeah.
So this is one of those spots where if you look across, you see the castle of Castelnau, which was the English one. And if you look to your right up the river, you see a couple more. And if you look to your left up the river in the other direction, you see a couple more. And it's absolutely stupendous because you also have what a castle from those times really looked like, with all the rooms of a medieval fortified castle that you can visit the whole thing. You visit the whole castle, including the kitchens and everything else. And you also get this spectacular view. So
that would be
neat.
a very fun one to see.
It's a great day. And then if you have enough time and you want to continue, it's a little further. And I'm not sure you're going to catch me if you ask me to tell you which direction. I think it's west, but I'm not
Well,
certain.
tell us the name. We'll find it on the map.
It's a town called Domme, Domme.
Okay.
And it's a bastide.
Okay.
It's on a regular kind of grid system. Now, I find it less magical in some ways than Benac and La Roque-Gagnac.
Yeah.
But it's a lovely town to visit. It still has some of its fortifications and walls and gateways that take you inside. And all of this you can do if you wish to in one day as a kind of follow the Dordogne River day. It's just absolutely wonderful.
So maybe you could stay in Sarlat.
That's what we did.
And if you have a car,
You go.
Stay a couple, like maybe half a day, walk around Sarlat, then go see maybe Benac.
And come back.
Then the next day, do a couple more of these.
Or just do a full day in Sarlat and closer in, and then do this next day and come back and stay in Sarlat. That's possible too.
Yeah.
Now the other thing to do, and you can do this staying in Sarlat, which is again something I have done.
Yep.
And I've done this personally, and I've done this with groups as well. Is do basically a day or more of things connected to prehistory. And here you have the richest part of prehistory, not only in France, but in the world, really in the world. Now, they're discovering more and more things in Spain and in Eastern Europe. But for the moment, this is really where it all began. And of course, the most famous one, although you can only see the copy, is Lascaux.
Yeah, go to Lascaux.
And Lascaux, to get to Lascaux, it's about half an hour drive. I'm not sure exactly, but let's say
Sarlat?
From Sarlat. Let's say
it's close.
40,
I didn't realize you were that close to Lascaux.
30 to 40 minutes because it's narrow little country roads. But you have to go to a town that is actually a very nice town to visit and also very pretty. That's a large, I would say it's a town. It's not a tiny village, called Montignac. And when you get to Montignac, they're all, it's big. I mean, it's what I would call a small town. So it's more than just a little village, but you will see all of the signs that indicate the direction for Lascaux. And Lascaux is up, you drive out of the town and up into a hill into this area of live oak forest and pine forest. It's very pretty. And of course, what has happened is that the original Lascaux is now closed definitively to the public.
Of course.
It was open actually for a few people a week up until 10 years ago. And then they realized that even that was destroying what was left of the inside because, it's the breathing and the carbon monoxide and or is it dioxide? I never remember actually.
I'm not sure.
One of them comes out of a car. The other one comes out of us. I don't know.
Our breathing is
our
not
breathing.
good.
It leaves bacteria that are eating
Probably
away at the walls.
dioxide.
No, it's probably dioxide.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
we'll be considered idiots. But, oh well.
Okay. We're not chemists, okay?
But what happened was, and this is where it all began, was that there was already kind of amateur archaeology in the region around here because a lot of things were found. Flints were found.
Yeah.
Pieces of bone of woolly mammoths, all kinds of stuff like that indicated that this was a region that had been populated by a human population in prehistoric times. And prehistoric times in this region really goes back as far as 35,000 BC up to the last glacial period, which is about 10,000 BC.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of this stuff that people knew about, even in the 1700s and in the 1800s, without it officially being called prehistory or archaeology. People just assumed it was old. Nobody had any idea of really how old it was. And there was a wonderfully interesting man who was an abbé, and his name was Abbé Breuil. And he was a local man who was the head of a monastery in the region. And his passion was old stuff. And he is considered to be one of the inventors of modern archaeology. And he would go out with different people and go exploring in some of these caves and digging up these bones and things. And he started writing articles. This is well before anybody could do DNA testing, carbon testing, anything like that. And this is the very beginning of the 20th century. He wrote articles and he said, this is not like a lot of people thought, stuff from 400 or 500 years ago. This is from thousands of years ago. And people at first disputed him. They said that's not possible. They didn't believe that that people that existed before, let's say the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians, they didn't think that Homo sapiens was an intelligent species that was able to do anything that long ago. And everything he wrote turned out to be true.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely everything. And he lived long enough to see the discovery of Lascaux. And Lascaux was discovered, and this is just, I'm telling this off the top of my head because I just, I love all this stuff and I've been there so many times. It was discovered in 1940 by 4 young men who were from the local village, from Montignac, and who had gone up into the woods with one of their dog. One of them had a dog.
Yeah, I think a dog got lost.
A dog,
in there.
and he literally, it's kind of like Alice in Wonderland. The dog went down this hole, and they went down to get the dog and follow him down, and basically wound up in this antechamber to this space that is, of course, absolutely unbelievably spectacular.
Yeah.
And this was, of course, the original Lascaux. And thankfully, by this time, by 1940, these 4 kids who I think were like 15 or something like that, 15, 16 years old, 14 to 16, that was the basic age of the 4 of them.
Yeah.
They understood immediately that they had found something that was extremely important. And so they didn't fool around with it. They didn't touch anything. They didn't do anything. They ran back to the village to tell the officials. And of course, from that point on, we have the beginning of the full riches of the region in terms of prehistoric art. And of course, what Lascaux is it's basically, and I really do, I mean, there are lots of people who write about this, or people who do archaeology and everything else, but I would say you could really say that it's the equivalent of going into a cathedral. It's really that beautiful.
Yes, because I mean, and I really think this is important to see if you have children, especially. They really love that because you can show them pictures ahead of time and talk about the whole period and all that, and they just love it. It's a very fun.
Well, it's all animals.
Yes, and it's animals. So even very young children, it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, Sarlat has all of these gorgeous little villages, and it has the prehistoric thing. Now, besides Lascaux, if you go, there's another little town that's only, again, I'm not sure, let's say a half an hour away, especially by car, not by bus, and it's a little town called Les Aisies.
Spell?
Les, L-E-S, and A-Z is E-Y-Z-I-E-S.
Okay.
Okay, Les Aisies.
Okay.
And in Les Aisies, there is the most wonderful, complete museum of prehistory. And it's great because it's got a lot of interactive stuff, so it's great for kids. It's a beautiful, teeny little town also. And nearby, you have 3 other sites that you can go and visit. And one of them is inside a cave, so you have to make sure you get a ticket ahead of time. All of these places that are inside caves, they limit the number of people per day, so you have to get your ticket ahead of time.
Yes.
But there are 2 that are basically
where you can
outcroppings, and they also have this kind of, it's kind of funky but fun, what they call a prehistoric park, where they have a reproductions of the woolly mammoths and all this kind of stuff. It was designed so that people with families with little kids can go there. And then there's this place that you can go that's right outside Les Aisies, right outside, maybe 10 minutes away, where you can walk along the cliffs on this pathway. And you get a vision of the way they've set it up is that you walk along, and it's this little river. It's not the Dordogne River. It's a beautiful little river called the Vézère. And you get an idea of what it was like for the people who lived in these times, because they lived in these open-ended outcroppings. They didn't live deep inside these caves, and they hunted. And they when the weather was nice, they came down into the valley, and I guess they picked fruit and stuff like that, because obviously at this point they're just hunters and gatherers.
Yes.
But there's a whole lot of stuff that's really good to do with kids, as well as just for adults. And again, it's a hugely gastronomical area.
Yes.
So this is the heart of where they produce the most wonderful foie gras. Everything you can do with a duck. Everything you can do with a duck. Everything you can do with truffles.
You got to try duck hearts if you're around here. Duck hearts are really good.
That sounds a little gross, though.
I know, but it's really delicious. Yes.
But
you haven't ever tried?
No.
Oh, jeez.
I've done a lot of other things, but I haven't tried those. Haven't tried duck hearts yet.
Okay, I'll have you over.
Okay, all right, duck hearts. But there are also other things. There are just these wonderful little towns. There's this lovely little town along the Vézère called Saint-Léon.
Okay.
Teeny little gorgeous town.
Leon, L-E-O-N?
L-E accent O-N, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Saint-Léon.
Has a gorgeous little chapel with frescoes from the 1100s and a couple of lovely little restaurants. We had lunch there once, just lovely, right along the river, very quiet, very beautiful gardens everywhere. There's a castle there in the middle.
Sounds like you could spend a month there.
Oh, that's why people go to the Dordogne for the summertime. Because you really can. What I'm saying is that Sarlat is gorgeous. And if you're interested in architecture, you can just spend a day just going in and out of all these things, getting a little bit of a hit of the market. But once you do that and you eat very, very well in Sarlat, as you do in this whole region, you can literally be based there for 2-3 nights or more, obviously.
Yeah.
And you can visit castles and teeny little villages and countryside.
Historical sites.
There's castles that have gorgeous French gardens. There's a Renaissance castle that's very close to Saint-Léon that is absolutely beautiful to see. What's the difference between a Renaissance castle and a fortified one? Well, a Renaissance castle has no fortifications.
And it's pretty. It's made to be pretty.
And it's meant to be pretty, and it has beautiful furniture inside it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be high and up a hill with walls around it and turrets and holes for shooting arrows out,
Right. The Renaissance castles were built to show off how wealthy you were and how, what good taste you had.
What good taste you had.
Yeah.
And they were after the time of the massive invasions,
of
mostly.
Course,
Except that, of course, the English and the French, no. So the English, now they say that the English are getting their final revenge because they're the ones that have bought up so many of these wonderful summer homes.
Well, listen, the reality is you sell a tiny flat in London and you get a really nice place.
And you can.
In some of those rural places in France.
And exactly.
I mean, by now, probably Sarlat, it's priced too high and places like that. But you can find a village that will have a place that you can renovate.
And not only that, but this is for people who really are thinking about a trip to France outside of Paris. This is a region where there are zillions of places you can rent by the week.
Yeah.
So you can rent a gîte, which is a whole house. You can rent a studio or a room in a B&B. This is a region that is filled because it's very well kept up. It's all been renovated.
Yeah.
It is definitely pricier than it was, certainly even 15 years ago.
Well, sure.
Because it's a very
there's demand.
It's a big demand for this area.
They fill it up every year. They just
and it's very beautiful. It's what I like to think of as a very civilized part of France. It isn't rugged. It isn't, the back country in Provence is very rugged.
Yeah.
Even parts of northern Lot the area is a lot more rugged. The Dordogne is very green and kind of soft hills, and it's more genteel. That's the perfect word for it. It's definitely more genteel. So you can understand why certain people would like to go there.
Yes.
It's very beautiful. And again, if you are staying in Toulouse for a while or Bordeaux, you can also, it's hard to do in a day, but you can definitely do an overnighter, go to Sarlat, take in part of Sarlat, go out and spend the rest of the afternoon visiting something that's not very far away, that do the next morning and then come back, because it's 2.5 hours away. You would really, it's kind of silly to run there and back in one day and not have time to do much of anything
Although,
else.
you know, people, I mean, Americans, they'll drive 10 hours. And,
that's true.
You know, it won't faze them.
They will. But if you think about it, it's... you might as well take it, you know, if you can.
Of course.
It's better to take advantage of it. So Sarlat is really, what I would say is the greatest base to be in the Dordogne area. This, and then to go out from there
and see a few things.
Few things. You can, you know, the Castelnau Castle, which is across the Dordogne River from the Baynac Castle, has a history of medieval armor and armories and arms. So for
young kids,
it's great,
especially young boys.
They love it,
and
absolutely love it.
And I bet they put on like
in the summer.
In the summer, they probably do put on reproductions and dress up and all of that.
Yeah, and it's
which
famous.
Even the girls would love.
In fact, I saw a program a while ago where it's also a castle that was bought up by somebody, so it's in private hands, that has been renovated and set up as this museum. And so it's really fabulous. And it gives you, it's fun.
Yeah.
And yet it gives you, again, a feel for what this area was like so long ago.
So remind me, Castelnau, is that a medieval one or is it
it's a medieval one. It's contemporary practically with Baynac.
Okay.
And they're across the river from each other.
See, I prefer medieval stuff. I don't know how you feel about it, but I prefer
compared to what?
To Renaissance.
Oh, well, it depends. You see, like the Renaissance castles, and there are 3, or I think, in the area, and I'll give you the names because offhand, for some reason, I'm blipping out on it. For people who like to see the beautiful decoration and what life was like in the Renaissance, because these have the Renaissance castles have gorgeous patterned tiles or stonework on the floors. They have decorative elements that are very gorgeous. Obviously, it's a different spirit, as you mentioned, than the fortified castle, which is about the wars and the old
horses,
and the
dogs, and
all of that kind of stuff,
all the battle stuff, and
so they're different, you know. So I think they have a different feeling, and I don't know. I kind of like it all. I love the villages. I love walking around the villages and looking at the old houses.
And if you go to a Renaissance castle, you're likely to see exhibits of the clothing of the time,
sometimes,
and the tapestries
exactly.
of the time,
or a French garden,
which
is very beautiful. You know, the manicured topiary gardens and things like that, which is the typical French Renaissance garden.
Yes,
and then of course the other thing is there are some very lovely little chapels, like I mentioned, this one in Saint Leon that has frescoes. Now, of course, I really like that because I like those old little churches, because this is painting from the 1100s. I get such a charge out of all of that. You know,
so long as they're lit somewhat where you can see them.
Yeah, I think some of them now, what they do is, you know, like they do in Italy, you put a coin in and it lights up for a few minutes, because the fact is, otherwise
they don't want to keep the light on a lot.
It can ruin the painting.
Yeah, or you need to go with a really nice camera like mine, and then you can take a picture in the dark, and it'll look really good.
And this is an area where if you're going in the warm weather, you can go boating. You can actually, there are some parts of the Dordogne where you can actually go swimming, or in the Vézère where it's, you know, cordoned off a little bit and you can actually go in the water.
Yeah,
because
in the
it
summer,
is pretty much runny, you know, it's
there's so many little activities you can do in the summer to all these places. Now, if you go in the middle of the winter, it's going to be closed.
A lot of it is going to be closed. Yeah, Sarlat is not closed.
Right, but the boating activities are not going to be there most likely.
In fact, I don't even know. But I would think that the castles stay open all year. It's possible that
Maybe
in
just weekends.
January, in the winter, it's just weekends. Those are things to check on.
Yeah,
you
you
know.
have to check on depending on when you go because.
But it's a gorgeous area, and there is just so much to do. And Sarlat is just talk about Sarlat to anybody, and their eyes roll and they smile and their mouths start to water. So there you are.
And it's lunchtime here.
And it's
really
lunchtime. Yeah.
So we're dying, folks.
Yep.
We're dying.
Yep. Where's my strawberries? It's not the right season.
All right, I think we've about covered it.
Oh yeah.
Sarlat, beautiful neighborhood, beautiful area.
Périgord Noir, and so much to see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, listeners. Again, I would like to remind you that if you'd like to give back, we would really love it if you would go to joinusinfrance.com/Amazon. Click on your country flag. That'll take you to Amazon. If you were going to buy something anyway on Amazon, and honestly, who doesn't? It gives us a small commission, which helps us cover the costs of producing, of keeping this podcast on the road for you. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And we will talk to you next week.
Next week.
Au revoir.
Bye.